The whistle stopped him mid-stride, the way a hand on the chest might stop a man walking too near a ledge, and for 3 full seconds the Duke of Harrow did not remember how to breathe correctly. Robin did not notice. Robin was mucking the 3rd stool from the end, sleeves rolled to the elbow, cap pulled low over a face too thin and too watchful to be called a boy's face by anyone who troubled to look twice, and nobody at Harrow Hall had yet troubled to look twice, which was precisely how Robin preferred it. The tune came out unbidden, the way it always did when the hands were busy and the mind was elsewhere, 4 notes rising and 3 notes falling, and a small held breath at the end like a door easing shut, and it was only when the shadow fell long and still across the straw that Robin looked up and found the Duke standing in the stable doorway as though he had been struck. He did not raise his voice. He had never needed to. "Where?" he said. "Did you learn that?" It was not a question shaped like a question. Robin set down the fork and straightened, chin level, the old habit of stillness settling over her like a second coat. Because a girl dressed as a boy and sweeping another man's stable floor for 4 shillings a week could not afford to flinch at a nobleman's tone, however strange it came. "From my mother, sir," Robin said. "She sang it over the washpot. I didn't know it was anyone's but hers." The Duke's face did the thing faces do when a man is deciding whether to believe a coincidence, and Robin watched him decide, and did not yet understand what had been decided, or that a tune could be a key, or that keys are dangerous things to carry when you do not know which door they open. She did not yet know what the whistle would cost her. Had she known, she would have whistled it all the same, because some things are not chosen, only inherited, and a person cannot help the shape of what was poured into her before she was old enough to hold the cup steady. Old Fen, the head groom, came round the corner with a bridle over his shoulder and took in the tableau with the flat. Unhurried eye of a man who had buried 2 wives and outlasted 3 stewards and found very little left in the world worth startling over. "He's new, your grace," Fen said before anyone asked him to. "Come Tuesday last, off the Amberfield road. Doesn't eat much and doesn't talk much either, which in my experience of boys is a mercy twice paid for." The Duke did not look away from Robin. "What is your name?" "Robin, sir. Just Robin." "Just Robin," the Duke repeated, as though testing the weight of a coin he suspected was clipped, and then, because a duke cannot stand gaping at a stable hand in his own yard without the whole estate remarking on it by breakfast, he turned the moment aside with the ease of a man well practised in turning moments aside. "See that the grey mare's off for is poulticed before noon. She favours it." "Already done, sir," Robin said, an hour past. She'd picked up a stone. That, more than the tune, was what made him pause a second time, because competence in a ragged boy was a rarer surprise at Harrow Hall than a ghost. And the Duke of Harrow was a man who had learned, at considerable cost, to notice the things that did not fit the pattern of the world as everyone had agreed to describe it to him. He said nothing further. He left the way he had come, and Fen watched him go with the particular squint of a man doing arithmetic he did not like the answer to. "You'll want to be more careful with your whistling, boy," Fen said, not unkindly, once the Duke was well out of the yard. "A tune's a small thing to hang a life on, but I've seen smaller things do worse." Robin only shrugged and picked the fork back up, because the yard did not muck itself, and because there was a deadline pressing on the whole of Harrow Hall that Robin as yet only half understood. 6 weeks. Fen had told her overbread and dripping the night she arrived. 6 weeks until the Michaelmas ball, at which the Duke was expected, by the whole weight of his aunt's expectation and his steward's careful arithmetic. to announce his betrothal and save the estate from whatever debts had been quietly mounting against it. 6 weeks was not so very long. It felt, that first evening, like a great deal of time. It would not feel that way for long. The second time the Duke sought her out, he did not pretend it was about the mare's forehoof. He came at dusk 3 days later, when the yard had emptied and the light had gone the colour of weak tea, and found Robin oiling harness leather with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who had never in her life been able to afford to do a thing badly. "You've a gift for horses," he said, by way of not saying what he had actually come to say. "My mother kept a stable for a farmer once, before she kept nothing at all," Robin said. "I learnt young that a horse will tell you the truth about a man faster than the man will tell it to you himself. A cynical philosophy for a boy of— how old are you?" 17, sir, or thereabouts." My mother wasn't precise about dates. She said a date was a debt you owed the parish, and she preferred to owe nothing to anyone. The Duke almost smiled at that, and caught himself before the smile arrived, the way a man catches a glass before it tips, and Robin filed the almost smile away, without knowing yet that she was the one who would spend the next 2 months slowly, patiently earning the whole of it. "I'll ask you plainly," he said. "Did someone teach you that tune to use against me? Are you sent here?" Robin's hands did not stop moving on the leather, though everything in her narrowed to a fine, cold point. "Sent by whom, sir? I don't know your family. I don't know your house. I know a song my mother sang me to sleep with, and I know that when I whistled it your face went the colour of skimmed milk, and I would very much like to know why, since it seems to have put my position here in some danger through no doing of my own." It was the boldest thing she had said to him, and she watched him weigh it, turning it the way a man turns a coin to check the mint mark. "It was my mother's," he said finally. "She died when I was 11. She used to sing it to my sister and me, and to no one else that I ever heard, in all my life, until 3 days ago in my own stable yard." The word landed in Robin like a stone dropped down a well, and she felt, rather than heard, the long silence before the splash. "I'm sorry for your loss, sir," she said, because it was true, and because she did not know yet what else to make of it. "Mine's some years gone too. She never told me it belonged to a duchess. She never told me much of anything, in the end, except to keep my head down and my hands busy, and never once come within 10 miles of a place called Harrow. And yet here you are. Hunger doesn't consult a map, sir, that got the almost smile again, further along this time, and further still when old Fen ambled past with a lantern and remarked, to no one in particular, that a man could stand talking philosophy at a stable boy till the cows genuinely came home, or he could let the cows come home, and one of those options involved supper. The Duke went. Robin finished the leather in the dark, turning her mother's last years over like a stone she had never had cause to lift before. The thin cottage on the parish edge, the coughing that came with the wet winters, the way Nell Vane's hands, worn to leather themselves, had never once let go of the small silver whistle she kept on a cord beneath her shift, not to be sold even in the worst of the hungry months, not even when the parish overseer suggested it plainly would fetch a good price. "Keep it safe," her mother had said, near the end, when the words had grown thin, and had to be spent carefully. "Keep it, and keep quiet, and if ever a day comes when it's safe to be loud, you'll know it by the bell in your own chest." Robin had not understood that instruction as a child. She was beginning, in the stable dark at Harrow Hall, to suspect she was living inside it. The steward found her 3 mornings later, in the feed store, with the ledger open on the barrel head and a stub of pencil behind her ear, and he found her, as he found everything, without appearing to have arrived at all. Simeon Voss had a gift for entering a room the way water enters a cracked jug, quietly, and only noticed once the damage was already done. He was a neat man, silver-templed, soft-spoken in the particular way of men who have learned that a raised voice invites scrutiny a lowered one never does. "You can read figures," he said, not a question. "A little, sir. My mother did accounts for a farmer, and I sat at her elbow. How industrious! And what do you make of these?" Robin had not meant to be caught studying the feed accounts at all. Fen had only asked her to tally the oat sacks against the delivery slip, a small enough task. But the numbers had not wanted to sit still under her pencil. The delivered weight running consistently, month on month, a shade lighter than the paid invoice. The difference small enough to miss once, and impossible to miss 4 times running. Only that the miller's been generous with his invoices and stingy with his sacks, sir, which seemed worth a note, though it isn't my place to say so above a note. No, Voss agreed, pleasantly, it isn't. He took the ledger from her with 2 fingers, the way a man lifts something faintly distasteful, and studied her rather than the page. "You've a steady hand for a stable sweep." "Vane, is it?" "Fen mentioned the name when you signed for your wages." "Robin will do, sir. I asked for a surname, not a preference." "Vane, then," Robin said, "because a name freely given invites less suspicion than one visibly withheld, and because she had not yet learned to hear the particular stillness that came over Voss's face at the sound of it, the way a pond goes still just before something beneath it moves. "An old name in these parts once," Voss said, almost to himself. And then, gathering the ledger under his arm with the mildness of a man closing a subject rather than opening one, he added, "I'll have the mill accounts looked into. You needn't trouble yourself with figures again. Sweep, and be glad of the wage, and leave the arithmetic to those paid to be troubled by it." He did not raise his voice once in the whole exchange, and it was only afterward, scraping the last of the barley into the bin, that Robin understood she had been threatened, gently, the way a man closes a door on a draught rather than slamming it, because a slammed door draws the household's notice, and a quietly closed one draws nothing at all. Word of the Duke's odd attentions to the new stable-boy had, by then, made its slow way through the servants' hall in the manner such things always do, gathering embellishment as it went, that his Grace had been seen twice at the stable near dusk, that he had asked the housekeeper, apropos of nothing, whether any Vane had ever been in service at Harrow, that his aunt, the Dowager Lady Honoria, had remarked over her tea that a man with a betrothal to settle by Michaelmas had no business haunting stable yards at all hours like a boy mooning after a hound. Robin heard none of this directly. She heard it in the way the scullery maids grew quieter when she passed, and the way the second groom, a broad sour boy named Perrin, began watching her with the particular resentment of someone who suspects another has been given something he was not, though neither of them yet knew what that something was. That evening, currying the grey mare by lamplight because the mare fretted less for her hands than for anyone else's, Robin found Fen leaning in the stall door with his pipe unlit, which was Fen's way of announcing he had something to say, and intended to take his time saying it. "A broom finds every corner, given time," he said. "So does a rumour. You want to think on which one you'd rather find you first. I've done nothing to be found out for, Fen. That," said Fen, "has never once in the history of great houses stopped a thing being found." The foaling came on a night with no moon at all, which Fen said afterward was exactly the kind of nightmares chose out of pure spite, and it was Robin who heard the mare's distress first, a low grinding note under the ordinary night sounds that no one else in the yard had the ear for. She had the Duke roused before Fen was fully dressed. Not out of presumption, but because the mare was his particular favourite, bred from his mother's own stock, and some things a household simply understood without being told. He came in his shirt-sleeves, hair unbrushed, looking younger and less armoured than Robin had yet seen him, and for 3 hours the two of them worked in the close gold lamplight, while the foal came wrong-turned, and stubborn and finally, gaspingly right. There is an intimacy in that kind of labour that no parlour conversation can counterfeit. And somewhere in the 3rd hour, wrist deep and past all pretence of rank, the Duke laughed, not the careful almost smile of the stable yard, but a real laugh, startled out of him by the foal's first indignant, wet-legged attempt to stand, and immediately fall over sideways into the straw. And Robin, watching it happen, understood without being told that she had witnessed something rare enough to be worth remembering. The way a person remembers the first time they see snow settle without melting. "That is the first time I have heard you laugh since I came here," she said, before she could decide whether saying so was wise. "Is it?" he said, and the astonishment in his voice was not for her observation, but for the fact itself, as though he had not noticed the silence in himself until someone else pointed at its absence. "My mother used to say a house with no laughter in it was a house keeping its accounts wrong somewhere. I hadn't thought about that in years. What was she like? Fierce, funny. She loved my father the way some people love a country, entirely, and without asking whether it deserved it. She died when my sister was still in leading strings, and my sister followed her within the year, and my father followed some years after that in every way but breath. And I have been Duke of Harrow since I was 21, and have not, I think, laughed like that since." He looked at her then, straw in his hair, and blood on his sleeves, and something unguarded in his face that had not been there in the stable-yard 3 weeks before. "You whistle her tune, and you tally figures better than my own steward's clerk, and you appeared at Harrow 6 weeks before I am meant to marry a woman I do not love, to save an estate I am beginning to suspect is being bled by someone closer to me than a miller's dishonest invoice. Tell me plainly, Robin Vane, what are you?" "Tired, sir, mostly," Robin said, and it startled a second laugh out of him, smaller than the first but real, and she felt the warmth of it land somewhere under her breastbone she had no ready account-book for. She did not tell him the rest, not the whistle beneath her shirt, warm from her own skin, not her mother's dying instruction to keep her head down at Harrow, of all impossible places. Not the fact that she had chosen this particular ragged coat and this particular boy's crop of hair for reasons that had nothing to do with fashion and everything to do with the roads a lone young woman cannot safely walk. That card she kept, turned face down, the way her mother had taught her to keep everything that mattered. "There's a piece I haven't given you," she admitted instead, watching the foal find its legs at last. "I don't say that to be coy. I say it because I don't yet know myself which parts of it are safe to say aloud, and I'd rather owe you an honesty later than spend a false one now. That," the Duke said, "is the most honest thing anyone in this house has said to me in a year." And he did not press her further, though something in the set of his shoulders told her he had marked the debt, and meant, in his own time, to see it settled. Simeon Voss had lived a long time on the strength of never being seen to hurry, and so it was 2 full weeks before the household noticed he had begun making inquiries. A quiet word to the parish clerk in the next village. a request to see the old wage rolls from 20 years back, a visit, ostensibly about drainage rights, to a farm where an aged washerwoman was known to have once kept house near the hall. He was looking, though no one yet knew it, for confirmation of a fear that had lodged in him, the moment he heard the name Vane fall from a stable boy's mouth as easily as breath, and he found it in the parish clerk's dusty rolls, in a christening entry 2 decades old. Lynette, daughter of Eleanor Vane, dismissed household companion, father not given. He sat with that entry a long while by candlelight, and what he felt, if a man so schooled in stillness could be said to feel anything so undisciplined, was the cold falling sensation of a debt he had thought buried coming due at the worst possible hour. 20 years before, a young under-steward with more ambition than patience had skimmed rather more from the Harrow accounts than his wages allowed for, and when an audit loomed too near for comfort, he had needed the household suspicion to land somewhere other than his own ledger, and Eleanor Vane, the old Duchess's foster-sister and closest companion, mother to another man's unacknowledged daughter. Poor and vulnerable, and easily disbelieved, had been the nearest soft place to press a thumb. A pearl brooch had gone missing from the nursery. A frightened young housemaid named Hester had been made to say she'd seen it in Nell's box. Nell had been turned out within the week, with no character and less mercy, and a young under-steward had climbed, in the years since, quite comfortably into the very post his crime had been committed to protect. He had thought the matter as dead as the woman he'd ruined. He had not accounted for a daughter with her mother's hands, and her mother's tune, and, worse, her mother's eye for a ledger that did not balance. Voss did not act in panic, because panic was beneath him, but he acted with the particular speed of a man who has recognised that 2 separate fires are now burning in the same house, and only 1 bucket of water to spare between them. He went first to Perrin, the sour second groom, and found him easy soil for the seed he meant to plant, since Perrin's resentment of the new boy's favour had been ripening untended for weeks. A coin was mentioned, a story was rehearsed, and on a market morning when the Duke and most of the upper household were 3 miles off at the county fair, Voss went himself to the tack-room where Robin kept her few belongings, and where, wrapped in a strip of flannel at the bottom of her small trunk, the silver whistle lay beside 2 shillings of saved wages, and when he came out again, the whistle was in his pocket, and the 2 shillings were arranged, quite visibly, atop her folded shirt, where any searching eye would find them looking exactly like the fruits of theft. What had kept Robin safe for 6 weeks, her competence, her steadiness, the Duke's slowly warming trust, became, in the space of that single quiet morning, the very shape of the trap closing round her, because a girl too good with figures and too familiar with a duchess's private tune was no longer merely curious. She was, if handled correctly, dangerous, and Voss had spent 20 years learning exactly how to handle dangerous things without ever raising his voice. The accusation came that evening, in the kitchen yard, with half the household present to hear it, which was precisely the point. Voss produced the whistle from his own pocket with the grave reluctance of a man performing an unpleasant duty rather than relishing one, and said that it had been found, along with certain moneys, hidden among the stable boy's things. And that Perrin, here the sour boy examined his boots with great interest, would swear he had seen the boy palm a coin from the tack-room strong-box not 3 days past. Robin felt the yard's attention swing toward her like a compass needle finding north, and felt, beneath the fear, a colder and steadier thing. The absolute certainty that the whistle in Voss's hand was her own, had been her own since before she could walk, and that its presence in his pocket was not discovery, but theft dressed as discovery. "That whistle is mine," she said, and her voice did not shake, though everything else in her wanted to. "It was my mother's before it was mine, and I have carried it since I was old enough to carry anything. If it was found in my trunk, sir, it is because that is precisely where it has lived for 17 years, and I would ask how you came to be searching my trunk at all, on a morning I was 3 miles off at the fair with everyone else. A steward may inspect the households under his charge," Voss said, mild as milk, "and it is a poor thief indeed who claims the stolen goods as inheritance the moment she is caught with them." The Duke, arriving late to the scene and taking in the tableau with a face gone very still, asked to see the whistle himself, and turned it once in the lamplight, and Robin watched him recognise it, not the shape of it, which he had never seen, but the weight of what it might mean, and watched the recognition war visibly with the careful, unilateral instinct that had governed him since he was 11 years old, and had decided, quietly, that the way to protect anyone he loved was to handle danger alone and never let them see the cost of it. That instinct won. That evening he did not defend her outright, not yet, not in front of the whole yard, because Voss had already murmured something about the estate's reputation and the ball 3 weeks off, and how little Harrow could afford another scandal on the heels of the last, and the Duke, grief-armoured and duty-bound, chose the quiet path rather than the loud one. He offered her a way out instead, a private word, an hour later, in the estate office, low-voiced and evidently meant as kindness. "Take a character reference and £10 and go quietly tonight," he said, not meeting her eyes. "No charges, no magistrate. It is more than most stewards would offer a servant under such a cloud. And it is the most I can do, without opening a door I am not yet certain I know how to close again." Robin looked at the £10 on the desk, more money than she had seen in one place in her whole life, enough to buy a season's safety, a fresh disguise, a fresh start, somewhere Voss's reach did not extend, and felt the whole aching weight of what refusing it would cost her. "No," she said, "I won't sign a paper that says I stole what was given to my mother by a woman who loved her, and I won't take money to disappear quietly so that whoever did search my trunk this morning can go on sleeping well. I have very little, sir, but I will not spend the one thing I have never once sold, which is the truth of what I am, even to buy my own comfort." She left the £10 on the desk, and left the office upright, and it was the costliest thing she had ever done, and the Duke watched her go with an expression she did not stay to read. She was gone from the hall within the week, dismissed all the same despite her refusal, because the Dowager Lady Honoria had declared the matter a scandal that could not be permitted to fester so near the ball, and the Duke, for all his private doubt, had not yet found the courage to make his doubt public against the combined weight of his aunt and his steward, and the calendar itself. Robin took a room above the smithy in the village on the last of her wages, and there, in the grey hour before dawn on her 3rd homeless morning, she finally understood the full shape of what her mother had carried silently for 17 years. Because old Fen came knocking, out of breath and out of patience with the whole business, and laid before her a bundle of papers he had no earthly right to possess. "Mrs. Pell gave me these," he said. Hester Pell, the housekeeper now, had been the frightened housemaid once, and something in watching history repeat itself beneath her own roof had cracked open a conscience she had kept locked for 20 years. Old wage rolls, a letter the Duchess wrote and never sent, near the end, when she was too weak to write more than a page at a sitting. Hester kept them out of guilt, she says, same as she's kept her silence out of fear. And she says she's more tired of the fear than she ever was afraid of Voss. Which I take to be a considerable admission from a woman who's flinched at his step for 2 decades. Robin read the letter by the smithy's banked fire, and found in the old Duchess's failing hand the whole outline of her mother's ruin. The missing brooch that had never truly been missing, only mislaid and later found behind a nursery cupboard, too late, after Nell was already turned out, and too proud or too broken to come back and claim vindication from a house that had not wanted to hear it. The whistle given freely, years before, engraved by the Duchess's own order as a gift between foster sisters, the guilt the Duchess had carried to her own early grave, too weak in her final months to do more than write a letter she never found the strength to send. Robin sat with that letter until the fire burned to ash, and felt something in her chest that was neither grief nor rage, but a strange, hard clarity, the way frost makes a window suddenly, briefly transparent. "He offered me money to disappear," she said to Fenn, "and I very nearly hated him for it. But he doesn't know any of this. He spent his whole life deciding alone what other people ought to be spared, because no one ever let him choose otherwise. And I think, Fenn, that if this is going to be undone at all, it will have to be undone in the light, before witnesses, because a quiet mercy is exactly the kind of thing this house has always used to bury its debts instead of paying them." Fenn studied her for a long moment, pipe unlit as ever. "That," he said, "is either the bravest thing I've heard from you, or the last foolish one. We'll know which by Michaelmas. The blackest of it was this: even with the letter, even with the wage rolls, there was no living voice yet willing to say plainly, before a magistrate and a household and a man who might yet choose duty over her, that Simeon Voss had built 2 ruins 20 years apart on the same lie, and without that voice, a dead woman's letter was only ink, and ink alone had never yet been enough to outweigh a steward's 20 years of careful, unhurried respectability. The days that followed moved the way water moves before it finds the crack in a dam, quietly, purposefully gathering. Fenn carried the letter to the Duke himself, refusing to be turned away by the footman twice, and stood in the study doorway until His Grace read it through in silence, and then read it through again. And something in the Duke's face, Fenn reported afterward, had gone the particular grey of a man realising he has spent a season protecting the wrong person from the truth. "I sent her away with £10 and a character," the Duke said, more to himself than to Fenn, "because I thought I was sparing her a public shaming. I have been sparing myself the trouble of trusting my own instincts since I was 11 years old, and I am done with it." He rode to the smithy himself that same evening, and found Robin at the forge fire, and did not waste time on preamble. "I need Hester Pell to say before witnesses what she has only said in private," he told her, "and I need it before Michaelmas, or Voss will have the whole matter buried under wedding contracts, and no one left with standing to dig it up again. Will you stand with me in the hall and let the whole of Harrow hear it, whatever it costs you?" "It will cost me being seen for exactly what I am," Robin said, "which is not a boy, sir, and never has been, and I would rather you heard that from me now than watch you discover it in front of the magistrate." The Duke absorbed that the way a man absorbs a blow he has half expected and finds, oddly. "Does not fell him. Ashford horses do not spook without a reason," he said slowly. "Neither, I begin to think, do stable boys. I find I am not so very surprised, Miss Vane, only sorry it took a fire and a stolen whistle to earn me the truth outright. Together, over 3 feverish nights, they built the case that Voss's own carefulness had left vulnerable, the old wage rolls, cross-checked against the current feed accounts in Robin's careful hand, showed the same telltale flourish on every falsified figure, a small curled tail on every numeral 2, a habit 20 years had not broken him of, the Duchess's letter, held back until the last possible moment. And Hestapel herself, coaxed by Fenn's blunt patience and the Duke's quiet assurance that no harm would come to. Her for speaking now, agreeing at last to stand and say plainly what she had done and why. Voss, for his part, felt the ground shifting beneath him before he could name the cause, and made the first true misstep of his careful career. He was seen, 2 nights before the ball, feeding pages from the old estate ledgers into his study fire, and it was Perrin himself of all people, conscience finally outweighing his coin, who reported it to Fenn before the last page had fully burned, salvaging enough charred fragments of Voss's own hand to matter. "He's frightened," Fenn said, holding the scorched paper up to the lamp like a man reading tea leaves. "First crack I've seen in 20 years of watching that man. Frightened men make mistakes, and mistakes are the one thing a broom always finds, given time." The plan that emerged was Robin's own in its bones, whatever the Duke's rank lent it in authority, not a rescue mounted on her behalf, but a case she had built with her own hands from her own mother's ruin. And she meant, whatever the cost to her disguise or her comfort or her pride, to see it argued in daylight, before witnesses, where objects could be held up and read aloud, and no one's soft voice could smooth the truth back under the carpet a second time. The great hall at Harrow filled on the eve of Michaelmas, with rather more urgency than the ball itself had ever promised, the Duke having quietly summoned the county magistrate, his aunt, the assembled household, and Simeon Voss himself, under the pretext of settling the estate's accounts before any betrothal could be properly announced. Voss came composed, as he always came, silver-templed and unhurried, and it was only when Hester Pell was called forward, hands twisting in her apron, that the first true fracture showed in his stillness. The magistrate, an unhurried man named Corbin, who had seen enough county scandal to be surprised by very little, asked his questions plainly. "Mrs. Pell, 20 years ago you swore you saw a pearl brooch in Eleanor Vane's box with your own eyes. Did you?" The hall held its breath the way a held breath holds a room. "No, sir," Hester said, and the word came out small and then, having been said once, came easier. "I put it there myself. Mrs. Voss told me where to lay it and what to say after, and told me a girl in service who valued her place would do as she was bid without asking why, and I was 17 and frightened, and I did as I was bid, and I have not slept easy a single Michaelmas since." Voss began, softly, to object to the character of a servant's memory after 20 years, but the Duke set the old Duchess's letter on the table between them, and beside it the whistle, and beside that the charred ledger fragments with their small curled 2s matching, unmistakably, the current season's falsified feed accounts, and asked Voss plainly to explain how a dead woman's own hand and a housemaid's 20-year guilt and his own unbroken habit of penmanship had all, independently, arrived at the identical conclusion. "Read the inscription aloud," the Duke said to the magistrate, and Corbin turned the whistle to the lamplight and read, in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall, "For Nell, who sang me safe. M. Marguerite's own hand, engraved before Robin's mother had ever been wronged, proof entire that the whistle had been love before Voss had made it look like theft." Something in Voss came apart then, not loudly, but the way old mortar comes apart, in a fine cascading crumble rather than a single crack. "I was 23, he said, and my father's debts were mine the day he died, and I had a sister to keep from the workhouse, and I told myself once, only once, that I would pay it back before anyone noticed the shortfall. And then it was 5 years gone, and then it was 20, and I have spent every day since watching that door for the knock I always knew was coming. It was, for a moment, almost pitiable, and Robin, watching the man who had ruined her mother reduced at last to a frightened boy's excuse grown old and threadbare, found in herself not triumph, but something quieter and stranger, a compassion she had not gone looking for and could not quite refuse. The Duke did not have him arrested. "You will leave Harrow tonight," he said, "with a small allowance sufficient to keep you from want, and you will go to your sister's house and stay there, and you will never again hold a ledger that is not entirely your own. I do this not for your comfort, Mr. Voss, but because the alternative is a public trial that would cost this house and everyone in it more than your disgrace is worth, and because I find, having watched a woman refuse £10 rather than sign away her own truth, that mercy paid forward is worth more than vengeance collected in full." Voss left the hall an old man rather than a dangerous one, and the door closed behind him softer than anyone expected. What came after unspooled slowly, the way relief always does, in a house that has spent weeks bracing for a blow. Lady Cassandra Ray, the polished young woman the Dowager had all but promised to the Duke, proved unexpectedly gracious once the truth came clear, admitting over tea the next morning that she had never much wanted the match herself, having been pressed into it by her own family's need quite as thoroughly as the Duke had been pressed into it by his, and the two parted with genuine goodwill, Cassandra remarking dryly that she would far rather be a friend to a happy Duke than a wife to a distracted one. A sentiment the Dowager, somewhat chastened, found herself unable to argue with. It was a fortnight later, in the walled kitchen garden where the last of the season's roses were going over, that the Duke found Robin, no longer Robin in name, though the household had grown fond enough of the name that half of them used it still, out of affection rather than confusion, sitting with the whistle warm in her palm and no further need to hide it. "You told me once," he said, "that you were not kept by anyone, that you kept yourself. I have thought about that sentence more than any other you ever gave me. It was true when I said it. I don't want it to stop being true," he said. "Which is why I am not going to ask you to marry me for the sake of an estate that no longer needs saving by anyone's sacrifice, or for a debt my family owes yours 20 years overdue, or for anything at all except this, that I have not laughed the way I laughed the night that Foal was born in more years than I can count before or since, and I would like the rest of my life to sound like that, if you would consent to be the reason it does. Marry me because you wish it. It is the only reason I will take. Linnet, for that was the name her mother had given her, Linnet Vane, and she found she liked the sound of it spoken aloud after a lifetime of answering to less, set the whistle down on the garden wall between them, a small silver thing that had cost 2 women a great deal, and finally, at long last, cost nothing further. "Then I will," she said, "and not because you are a duke, and not because it settles any debt, but because you are the first person since my mother died who ever let me put a card down and did not immediately ask to see the rest of the hand." The wedding, when it came in the first cold week of true autumn, was smaller than anyone at Harrow could remember a duke's wedding being. Held in the estate chapel with only the household and a scattering of neighbours present, and old Fen wept without shame through the entire ceremony, and claimed afterward it was only the dust in the rafters, a claim nobody in the chapel troubled to believe. Hester Pell stayed on as housekeeper, her old guilt at last set down like a weight she had carried so long she had forgotten it could be put anywhere. Voss lived out his years in his sister's small house on his modest allowance, writing once, a letter of genuine remorse that Linnet read, and did not answer, and did not burn either, which seemed to her the fairest measure of mercy she had left to give. Nearly a year turned before the stable-yard at Harrow saw another dawn quite like the first one. But it came at last, pale gold and cool, Linnet standing where Robin once had, a small bundle warm against her shoulder, and she found herself whistling without thinking, the same 4 rising notes and 3 falling, and the Duke came round the stable door exactly as he had the first time, and stopped exactly as he had the first time, and this time it was not fear that stilled him, but the plain, unhurried joy of a man who has learned at last which songs are safe to love out loud. "Hush now, hearth-bird," Linnet sang softly to the small warm weight against her shoulder, the words her mother had never taught her, but that had always somehow been there beneath the tune, waiting for a voice steady enough to carry them. "The dark's not for keeping. And if this story warmed you, if you have ever carried something small and precious through years that gave you no reason to hope it would ever be safe to show it to anyone, then pull your chair a little nearer the fire, because there is always room by this hearth for one more, and the kettle is already on." I would love to know in the comments below which line stayed with you longest, or what you would have done in Linnet's place at the garden wall, £10 sitting untaken on the desk behind her. Stay a while if you can, and keep a place warm by subscribing, so you never miss the next story told by this fire. And wherever you are tonight, be gentle with the ones who kept your lamp lit when you didn't know to ask them to. Sleep well. The dark's not for keeping.